Good afternoon. This is the Board of County Commissioners Board Work Session. This is a regular meeting and it's Wednesday, March 15th, 2023. It is 12:04 p.m. This session is set to go until 12:30 p.m. This is a hybrid meeting. We're at 3000 Pacific Avenue Southeast, room 110. For public virtual attendance, you may follow along on the Thurston County YouTube channel. I'm Carolina Mejia. I'm the chair of the board. To the right is Vice Chair Ty Menser. Joining us via Zoom is Commissioner Gary Edwards. Also in the boardroom, we have County Manager Ramiro Chavez, as well as Assistant County Manager Robin Campbell. And we have staff from Community Planning and Economic Development here today to present CPA-16 Community-Driven Review of Agriculture. Update on long-term agriculture designation criteria review. So handing it.
Jump right in?
Yes.
Excellent, sounds good. Joshua Cummings, Director of Community Planning and Economic Development. We are here once again to have another conversation on agriculture in our community. Wanted to first say thank you to the Board of County Commissioners. Again, it's important, and we've received the direction from the board to engage on many topics related to agriculture and have dedicated resources and staff. And thank you to Ashley for her outreach to the community. This topic that you'll hear about is a check-in. We want to make sure that we inform the board early and often on the areas related to the long-term agriculture designations. So there is no decision that'll come out of this, but just know that having the direction, the specific direction to move forward on ag issues and then actually implementing that, that's what we're in the process of. So moving forward on all topics ag, and this one is LTA. So go ahead, Ashley. Oh, Maya, thank you. Ready, Maya?
Yes, I am. Thank you. Maya Teeples, Senior Planner with Community Planning. Today's briefing is a short 30-minute check-in, informational only. We do not need any direction from the board today, but just giving an update on the long-term agriculture designation, which is one component of the CPA-16 project. Next slide. So today's briefing, I'll provide an overview of the project, including the background of how CPA-16 came to be and specifically the LTA review piece, the project drivers, and also some of the project history. And then I'll go into a brief overview of our stakeholder group's work, who is really the key player in some of the proposed amendments moving forward. Next slide. So there are several drivers to this project, going back all the way to 2019 when we were in the middle of our periodic comprehensive plan update. The public, the Agriculture Advisory Committee, and the Planning Commission all identified that agriculture was a big issue and that the county needed revisions to policy language and other programs. So during that update in late 2019, the Planning Commission made a recommendation that the board should further investigate agriculture and policies related to it. And tagging on to that, in early 2020, we received an appeal on that 2019 comprehensive plan update from FutureWise, and the appeal was specific to long-term agriculture designation and zoning. And specifically, that appeal requested that the county use updated soils information in determining where those areas are located. And then in April of 2020, the board docketed the CPA-16 community-driven review of agricultural policies and programs as a result of that Planning Commission recommendation and also the appeal that we received. Next slide. So we've been working on this project since late 2020, early 2021, and in early 2021, Community Planning issued a survey to help identify what the priorities of the community were. And through that survey, we identified several priorities of the community, including streamlining permitting, increasing agriculture protections, and then looking at the zoning to increase agriculture protections, and also revamping our conservation programs like transfer of development rights, purchase of development rights, and open space tax program, which you heard about earlier today. In May of 2021, the board reviewed those priorities that came out of that survey, and that briefing set and confirmed the scope of the broader CPA-16 project. The LTA review of zoning and designation was just one component of that, just one small piece. So there are several pieces, and we're talking about the one part of it today. And then in January of 2022, we brought back to the board the long-term agriculture zoning and designation and asked which criteria we should look into further. And the board directed us to take a targeted approach. So not opening all of those criteria, but opening specific criteria that the priority identified as worth looking into. And then in October of 2022 to February of 2023, we met with a stakeholder group. We met with that group 7 times, and they helped shape some of the options and themes that we are getting ready to move forward to the public and also the Planning Commission. Next slide. So just to go over the CPA-16 community-driven ag review project very briefly, as I mentioned, this long-term agriculture zoning and designation review and update is just one component. It's the white circle on this chart, but there are several other components that address the other priorities of the community, like permit streamlining, open space tax program updates, and the others listed here. And all of these are kind of on separate tracks. So that's why we're bringing them to you in pieces, and we've pulled this one out so we can move it forward and meet the requirements of the appeal in a timely manner. Next slide. So just a little overview about what and why we do and have long-term agriculture in Thurston County. So long-term agriculture is both a zoning district and also a land use designation, which means that it not only is a future land use, but it includes development regulations that are associated with it that apply when people come in for permits. And the county is required under state law to protect lands that can be used for agriculture now or in the future. This designation is intended to protect ag lands that have long-term commercial significance and not all agricultural lands, so not necessarily every gardener farm that's out there in Thurston County. And how we determine which lands are protected is by what we call designation criteria, which are formal policies that live in the comprehensive plan. And they are guided by state law about what we should look into specifically. And those policies consider things like soils, the underlying soils on the land, the parcel size, proximity to urban areas and public utilities, and several other items. Next slide. So in January of 2022, the Board of County Commissioners directed staff to take a targeted approach to reviewing the designation criteria for how we determine where these lands and which lands are protected as long-term agricultural lands. And the specific pieces that the board directed us to look into include consider designating long-term agriculture within the UGAs, consider protecting smaller acreage farms and parcels in the designation criteria, and also to consider revising the block size requirement. And block size is basically the minimum acreage that a group of parcels must be in order to be included and protected. Next slide. So as I mentioned, we got to work and we met with a stakeholder group over 7 meetings beginning in October last year. And the stakeholder group really drived. It was a fun process. Some of the members might be in the room with you today, but we had 13 members that regularly attended those meetings, and it included representatives from large farms, small farms, farmland protection advocates, and then the building and development community. So realtors and Olympia master builders participated as well. And we also invited technical experts to attend the meetings as they saw fit for them from cities, state agencies, and tribes. And we did have some of those folks regularly attend the meetings. Some folks just popped in on topics that were relevant to them. Next slide. So the general themes that we heard from that stakeholder group, these are kind of the overarching themes that came out of that work. The first is that financial compensation should go hand in hand for lost development rights for any expansion of the long-term agriculture designation and zoning. The second piece is that agriculture is diverse and includes different types and sizes of farms. So Thurston County has a variety of types of farms and also sizes of farms. Long-term agriculture is a community benefit, so farmers alone should not have to carry that cost burden. and also that existing conservation programs need to be looked at again and revisited, and additional tools provided to protect agriculture that is beyond zoning, maybe different from zoning. And finally, water availability came up throughout our stakeholder group meetings as a concern for new farmers. Next slide. So just to go over the major themes for stakeholder group on the specific criteria that the board requested we look into. The first criteria is for soils, which is the part that we're being appealed on and we're required to update. Currently, we designate parcels that have 50% or more prime farmland soils, and what the group landed on in discussions and the theme that came out of that was to protect lands that have the highest proportion of prime farmland soils, so 75% or more. For block size, this is how many acres a group of parcels must be in order to be included in the designation. Currently, we require a group of 320 acres or 200 acres if it's close by to existing agriculture somewhere else in the designation. And some members felt that this criteria is no longer relevant, while others stated it should be maintained but significantly reduced as low as 40 acres to 100 acres. For parcel size, 20 acres is the current requirement. The group discussed leaving this as it is or considering a smaller acreage between 10 and 20 acres. And additionally, the group requested we look into what the median average farm size is for Thurston County. And we did look into that, and it's actually 15.5 acres. So we're using that in some of the language we're going forward with. And then finally, around urban growth areas and protecting agricultural lands of long-term commercial significance in those areas, the group discussed this, and this was one of the items that the group was fully in agreement on, that the zoning is not the correct tool to protect agriculture in those areas, but that the county should look into other ways to protect and facilitate agriculture within the UGAs. Next slide. So the next steps for this project, as I said, this is an informational briefing only. We're about to go out to the community and hold several community informational meetings in late March and April. And so you may start hearing about this from citizens or your constituents. In April, we'll give an update to the Thurston County Agriculture Advisory Committee. And then beginning in May and all the way through July, we'll begin our Planning Commission review, Planning Commission public hearing. We expect to bring this before the board in early fall at the end of this year, and then anticipating a final action no later than December of this year. And so that concludes my presentation, and we have a little bit of time for questions if there are any.
Thank you. Questions, Commissioner Edwards?
Yes, can you hear me okay?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Two things. You mentioned 15.5 acres as far as kind of the size, I think. So if you could clarify a little more with that. But then you said protect areas within the UGA. What about outside of the UGA?
Great questions, Commissioner Edwards. So the 15.5 acres is the average size of farms that are, and how we calculated that was we looked at current use agriculture that is enrolled in the assessor's tax program, and also parcels that fall within the Washington State Department of Agriculture cropland layer. So it might not capture everything, but it's our best guess. And the average size of farms in those areas was 15 acres. So going forward, some of the maps that we'll be creating and the themes that we'll bring to the community and also the Planning Commission will be around that 15 acres, but also the other request of the stakeholder group, which was to go down to 10 or to keep it at 20. And then your other question, I'm sorry, I just completely drew a blank. Could you repeat it for me?
Actually,
Yes.
Sir, Commissioner Edwards, I think the first part, Maya, is all of this relates to the rural county. Is that correct?
Yes. Yes, that's correct. UGA versus rural county. So this update is in rural unincorporated county primarily. We do not currently designate agricultural lands within the urban growth areas, but that was something that we heard from the community early on in the survey that we should look into. And we did look into that with our stakeholder group, and ultimately they decided don't zone for agriculture in those areas, but look into other tools that can help facilitate continued use of agriculture in those areas. So primarily this update will be affecting rural unincorporated county.
Okay, that clarifies that. What are other counties doing when it comes to the 15.5 average?
Yeah, counties are kind of all over the place on that, and this is the kind of information that we will get more in detail with the board in the fall when we bring this back. But a lot of other counties have 20 acres. Some counties have larger requirements up to 40 acres, and then some counties have multiple zones, so they can drop down to as low as 5 acres or 10 acres. So it's kind of all over the map. 20 is about the average that we see across different jurisdictions.
I guess just a quick follow-up on that. My concern is sometime in the future, for an example, you could raise a lot of carrots on 5 acres of land. And I'd hate to kind of lose that ag property just because it might be under the 15 acres or something. And I want to give incentive to those folks that want to make a decision later on, years down the road, that, hey, we want to get involved and our little business is going to be taking carrots to the farmer's market or whatever.
Yep.
So anyway, just
And
food for thought. Thank you.
And to that point, this is not intended to protect all agriculture. We're only looking at larger scale commercial agriculture, and it's really to protect the underlying land and the soils. So it doesn't require that people do agriculture on their land in this zone. It's just intended to protect the land for current or future use of agriculture. But the incentivizing piece comes into a lot of the other programs that we have going on, like the open space tax program, for example, that Ashley talked about earlier today. That's a tool that incentivizes folks to continue agriculture on their land, even if they're not zoned in this district. So this is just one tool in the toolbox, and it's meant to go along with several others.
I guess I don't know what my seatmates are doing. I can't see them if they're getting antsy. But one other thing, are we going to try and designate as ag land? Say somebody's got, I don't know, 40 acres of solid rock. It's not going to grow anything. It's just a glacial till of rock, I guess. So just because it's out in the rural area, we're not going to put a restriction on that so that they won't be able to utilize their land for, I don't know, something else. I don't know what that is, but does that make sense to you?
Yeah, and you're getting at the point. We use the United States Department of Agriculture soils information, and that is what this map is based off of. So it's not a perfect map, and there might be some properties that have kind of wrong lines on their land, and folks can attest to. They can basically test out if they think that the soils information is wrong that we're using. But yeah, we won't be mapping things that are not considered prime farmland. This is really intended for only the areas that the United States Department of Agriculture is mapping as prime, or it's already in commercial use for agriculture.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Questions, Commissioner Menzer?
My questions are kind of scattered. I'll start kind of where Commissioner Edwards left off. So one thing I'm not clear about, and maybe it'd be helpful to clarify at a later briefing, is just like when it comes to designating agricultural land, like kind of what's the goal at the large scale? Meaning, like people are always saying, well, Pierce County has 20% of its land or 50% of its farm, you know, and we've only got 20%, whatever. And are we comparing, should every county have a certain amount of LTA? Like, is it apples to apples because every county should have a local set of agricultural lands to provide food stability for disasters and all those different, you know, good goals to have like local food? Or are we looking regionally? You know, maybe all the good soils are in Pierce County, right? And maybe at a regional scale, Thurston County doesn't need as much, or all the good, maybe vice versa, all the good soils are in Thurston County, and we should be doing twice as much as Pierce County, because at a regional scale, we've got the land that's more appropriate for the farming. I'm not sure what the goal is. I mean, is it that we want a minimum regional floor? Are we only looking at prime agricultural soils? I don't have a sense of what percentage of Thurston County land has these soils, and how important is it that we there's, the land is what the land is, but then there's what people are doing on the land, which is a totally different layer, and it may be totally disconnected. It may be that all the development, like you said, no, one of the recommendations is don't zone long-term ag in the UGA. Well, how much prime farmland soil is in the UGA? I mean, it may be that our development is out of whack with, that may be unreconcilable, but it'd be good to just know, like, is it that we've got way more prime farmland soil than we really need to preserve over the long term, so we can forget some of it if it's in the UGA, or forget some of it if it's already developed in some other way? Or do we need to like really, we barely have enough, and so we need to really be focusing in on trying to capture 90% or 75% or whatever that number is of those prime farmland soils into this long-term ag? Like, having that big picture, like, what's our goal? Because to throw numbers around, I don't know if I'm comparing apples to apples, really, honestly. I mean, I've kind of just stayed out of this because I knew this was of great interest, and all these stakeholders and ag committees working, and I've got their letters, and I just, when it comes time for me to really like make a decision, I kind of need that big picture information. I don't understand, so a specific question is, you went fast, Maya, I don't understand the, on slide 10, the soils piece. It's like the current criteria is 50% plus prime farmland. The proposed criteria is protect land with highest proportion at 75 plus. Can you explain what this means?
Yeah, I'll go ahead and touch on that one. So currently, if you have a parcel that's 100 acres and 50 acres of that has prime farmland soils on it, then it's included in the designation. The recommendation that came out of the stakeholder group is if you have 100 acres of a parcel, then 75 acres of it needs to have prime soils on it. So they really upped that amount, only protect the parcels that have the greatest amount of prime farmland soils on it.
When you say designate, I got into, and some of this is repeating, I tried to meet with Ashley, but honestly, I just need to hear it over and over again. So it's no disrespect to the information you gave me. It's just that it doesn't sink in until I hear it like 10 times. So when you say designate, what do you mean? That doesn't mean you're saying zoning it. You're saying to just consider it as maybe, what does that mean, designate?
So it's both. We designate it in our comprehensive plan at the policy level, and we also zone those areas. So it does have development regulations that are associated with it when people come in for permits. It limits subdivision potential on properties, and it is also a map and written out policies in the comp plan that identify where those lands need to occur. So it's on both levels.
So you're saying that that unless my parcel has 75% or more, I don't need to worry about any of that stuff that you just said?
Potentially. So so there are some parcels that get kind of wrapped in because they're surrounded by other agricultural operations. Let's say that's an example where you might have something that's not 20 acres or doesn't have the 75%, and it's still included because it's surrounded by very large agricultural parcels. But by and large, we would remove parcels that do not have 75% or more prime soils on it.
That protects less farmland, not more.
Did you hear that, Maya?
Yes, and that's correct. So the proposed criteria from the stakeholder group only protects the parcels that have the most prime soils. So as we move this forward, we'll have a series of maps that will show all sorts of these things. We'll have a baseline map that shows the current criteria with only the updated soils on it, which is to meet the appeal that is coming from FutureWise. And then we'll have a series of other maps that have come out of these stakeholder group themes. So there's going to be a range of possible options, but that's part of the discussion is, do we protect a 200-acre parcel that only has 100 acres of prime farmland on it? Or do we limit that to parcels that have the most prime farmland?
I'm not sure I really understand all that, but I'm gonna move on because I know we're out of time. So when you say, my last question is, when the stakeholders say that the zoning shouldn't fall on the backs of the farmers, we need financial compensation, they shouldn't carry the cost borne as community benefit. So how does that work? Like how have other, how do we compensate them for, how does the community compensate them for the need to do so, and how have other counties managed something like that?
Yeah, that's a great question, Commissioner Menser. So a lot of that compensation will come from other tools that we have ongoing updates to. The transfer of development rights program, the purchase of development rights program. It could also come from bond issuance from the county. So there's a number of different tools that the county could implement to get to something like that. And Ashley, do you have anything that you want to add to that since you're working on some of those other pieces?
Sorry, I think I'd say more to come, since we're at 29, I wanna make sure, Commissioner Mejia, you have any questions or?
I'll go ahead and set up a meeting with Ashley, because I do have a couple of questions, so Ashley and I'll reach out and maybe we can schedule something where I
And
can
so,
go
as
through.
we started at the beginning, this is to make sure that the Board of County Commissioners is aware that this topic is gonna be out in the community. This is not the end, this is the beginning. And these questions and how to frame the responses is really helpful, so any input that you can provide on how we can get the word out better, we're open to receive.
Okay, it is 12:30, we are adjourned.